Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, a podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today, you'll be hearing from an individual who walked away when he was at the very top of a very successful 26-year corporate career in Australian and multinational organizations. He went on to create startup businesses which focus on his passion, the development of human potential. Over the last 12 years, André Alphonso has started up and profitably grown multiple businesses, which he continues to lead both in person and virtually from his base in Sydney, Australia. He has trained over 30,000 people in leadership skills, selling skills, and professional and personal development areas. He's worked in and consulted to over 20 different industries, and he has even physically worked in 14 countries across the world. André Alphonso is known by many labels: managing director, chairperson, author, entrepreneur, just to name a few. However, if you ask him the label that he is most drawn to, he says it's adventurer. He is an avid collector of adventures and not material things. Professionally, he finds his adventures in numerous ways: leading several companies in Australia and overseas, working with leaders either as an executive coach or as a consultant, delivering keynote presentations and workshops, collaborating with others to create something new, and always exploring ways that he can give back to his community. I hope you're excited to absorb the knowledge and wisdom that André has gathered over his inspiring career. Let's head on over to the interview. All right, so welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock stay driven towards success. Today, I'm happy to welcome to the show André Alphonso. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Eric. Good to be here.
Man, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And getting started here, what got you into business in the first place, André?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I often look at my life in two parts, Eric. The first half of my life the first half of my professional life anyway, from till about the age of 50, I had a very successful corporate career and sort of, rose to the dizzy heights. I was very comfortable, great job. I was running a management consulting operation, an international company. I had looked after the Australia New Zealand operation. So life was pretty good. I had 2 European cars in the garage, very comfortable. But there was something inside of me that was going, what next? What next? Here I am, 50 years old. And I was going for a walk one morning. I'll never forget this. And I was about to get into a phone call with my boss, who was the president of the company based in Boston, about my next stop, my next job. Was it going to go to Asia? Was it going to come to the US? Because I kind of leveled out over here. And as I was going for the walk thinking about this, an idea struck me that why do I want to actually put myself in the firing line for more hard work, more stress? Why don't I do something for myself? And the idea came up of looking at opening up this company, this organization I work for, their operation in India. I'd done a strategy paper on India, but this was 2008, just before the financial crisis hit us, and they shelved the idea of investing anything in India. So I decided to invest myself. Once it's a strange thing. Once you have an idea, in that instant, Eric, it was so compelling that I came home, got on the phone, talked to my boss in Boston, said, "Hey, this is an idea." He thought it was a great idea because he always wanted to be in India. I was going to take his brand, but under my investment in there, and that was it. So that was my entry, if you like, in the second half of my life into working for myself and setting up an organization for myself. And that was in 2008 that happened. So I guess 13 years ago now.
Wow. Yeah. And you go from the corporate environment where you said you have, maybe kind of a cushy type living at that point, and you take a risk and be what some might call a midlife entrepreneur. You mentioned that term in our pre-interview discussion. And would you mind sharing a little bit about that or how people go through that type of transition as they're, going through their lives?
Yeah, I had no idea of what a midlife entrepreneur was until someone shared it with me and said, "Andre, this is what you are." And I'm, what? Because, when you get into business, you don't actually think to myself, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. You just have an idea and then you want to go with it. So the idea of a midlife entrepreneur is this, Eric, and it's based on this idea that if you look at adult lives, most people now live till they're about into their 80s, right? Healthily
Yep.
into their 80s. And if you take away the first 20 years of your life, because you go to school, you get educated, you learn to brush your teeth and tie your shoelaces and do a tie, from your 20s to, your adult life, you actually only are at half time when you enter your 50s, right? And it struck me because a lot of people said you get into your 50s, you sort of go into this decline. And the interesting thing is if you look at those two halves of your life, the first half of your professional life is all about accumulation. It's about getting degrees, getting houses, getting wealth, families, kids, homes, cars, boats, whatever else you want to do. And then when you've got all of those sorts of things, which is typically, up until about your 40s or 50s, for a lot of people, not for everyone, for a lot of people, you go, okay, what next? And something happened, and it happened to me for sure, is you sort of think, the second half of my life is not one of accumulation. I don't want to accumulate any more things, but I want to start making a contribution. I want to do something that's significant. And the only way I'm going to do something that's significant is to go out. So, in the old days, I used to call it a midlife crisis, perhaps. And I think that's what it was. And you come to a decision point, I think. A lot of people I know, a lot of people I talk to, there is a decision point in your 50s. You either go down the road of protecting everything you have and you focus on kind of the notion of retirement, which is, I've paid my dues, I can just retire. But there's a few people who sort of say, actually, at this stage of my life, kind of got the most wisdom I've ever got, the most skills I've ever had, the most experience I've ever got. So rather than turning the volume down on my life, I should be turning the volume up. And I think that's how I felt in the 50s. How do I turn the volume up? Because right now, I'm financially stable. I've got all of this experience and skills in leadership and negotiation and sales and organization and presenting. I've got a massive network of people. I don't want to betray all that. I'm going to turn the volume up. And that was the trigger for me, rather than going into protect what I had mode, is to risk what I had mode and go for it. And I think when I shared that story with a bunch of people, they actually talked to me and said, well, that Andre is a classic midlife entrepreneur. And I went, I didn't even think of myself as an entrepreneur back then. But I loved it, right? And I think that's ignited a passion in me, which it's not going to be extinguished, not until in my 80s, I don't think, because all of a sudden I'm doing work that I love doing. I'm not doing it for somebody else. I'm doing it for myself. I'm choosing the people I work with. I'm choosing the ideas that I want to run with. And I'm going to make mistakes along the way. So, that's kind of where it is. And hopefully that answers your question, Eric, of what a midlife entrepreneur is and does and how you get into it, maybe.
Yeah, it definitely answers it. And it makes me think of another question, it's kind of related, but if you take someone who is in, let's say, their 20s, I'm in my late 20s, what advice would you share with them if they believe that they want to do entrepreneurial type things at this point, knowing what you've found out along the way?
Yeah. Well, I'd say there's a couple of things you would do. It's the advice I'd give you and others. It's, first of all, and it's managing the tension that exists within you, Eric, or anybody else in their 20s or 30s. The couple of tensions is, the first thing, it's about you. It's about you because you've got to ask yourself the question, why am I doing it? Why am I going into business for myself? What is it that I'm looking for? Is it freedom? Is it adventure? Is it money? Is it make a difference to the world? Is it my family? Is it serving others, more time, flexible lifestyle? I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why people go into business in the first place. And I'd say, know exactly why you're going into that business and don't lose sight of that. Okay, that's the first bit of advice. Now, the other opposing tension, once you do that, is it's about you. It's not about you. And once you do make that decision to get into business, it then becomes about what it is that you can deliver that's going to be interesting and people are going to buy. And that becomes an interesting journey in itself as you try to figure out what is the formula that make people want to engage with me, people buy what I sell. How do I grow this business? How much do I want to grow this business? And so on and so forth. So those tensions are constantly there within you. So the first one is, know why you're going into it, and then recognize that once you're in it, it's not about you anymore. It's largely about the customers and the people that you're serving. That's the first bit of advice I'd give you. The second bit of advice is probably a metaphor, if I can kind of use a metaphor here. I often liken it, and people have asked me this before, is it's a bit like a road trip. If you're going on a road trip, there's three characters. So let me go back a step. In business, there's three critical characters that kind of enter your psyche. The first one is the expert. The expert is what you do. The kind of work you do that makes you good at what you do. That's the sort of thing you're going to go out there, produce, sell. So you become the expert in your little niche, whatever that is. That's not enough, right? So there's another character that emerges into that, and that's the dreamer. This is the person that has grandiose ideas of where they want to go and how they want to kind of look at life and, the opportunities that might exist. So they're very much looking into the future. And then the third character that enters your psyche is the realist. These are the people who kind of look at the practical issues of just getting by day to day, whether you have enough money in the bank and so on and so forth. Now, all of these characters enter my head. And I think a lot of people's heads as well as they get into this business. And so the metaphor of a road trip is if you're going on a road trip and you have these three characters with you. If it's the dreamer that is the one who's driving and you're listening to, they're going to look and go down all of the different scenic routes and lookouts along the way, but they're likely to run out of gas because they're just not interested in doing that. The expert is the person who just wants to drive the car because that's what they do really, really well. And the realist is the person that's kind of looking at, have we got enough gas? Where are we going to stop for lunch? And so on and so forth. Now, you need all three of these, I think, to be successful. And I think I've learned the hard way personally because I definitely filled the role initially of the expert and then the dreamer. And I still am the dreamer. And I've got to, entertain the realist, if you like, that comes into being, because otherwise I'd be broken. None of my businesses would be going. So as someone moving into business in their 20s and 30s, it's to embrace the tension. Don't be one of these. You've got to be all three of these. And if you can't be all three of these, get someone who is. Now, my wife, Kathy, I was very fortunate when I went into my business. We went into it together. She's definitely the realist. And kicking and screaming, she would bring me back to looking at, the practical issues of what we had to do, whether we had enough money in the bank, whether we were going to invest in this or not invest in this, and so on and so forth. So that tension that exists, we have to embrace. And I think that's kind of the best advice I can give anyone who's going into business.
So if we have an entrepreneur listening on the podcast or someone that has an idea maybe that they want to kind of try out and see what they can do with their entrepreneurial type dream, would you say it's better off for them to develop those three pieces that you just described within themselves initially, or to seek those out? Is it easier to seek them out or try to build them within when you're starting off?
Yeah. I think either or, right? So if you have an inclination to do that, absolutely do it. But if you don't. So I'll give you a perfect example. In terms of the businesses I run right now, we've just launched another business, which is around mindfulness. It's called Shanti Day. We only launched it literally just over a month ago. It's a B2C business. I've never worked in the B2C space before. All of my expertise, if you like, has been in the B2B side, organization to organization. So in the B2C space, it's all about social media, digital marketing, which I have very little knowledge of, nor do I have huge interest in it, right? It's not kind of my thing. I'm not an Instagram junkie, or Snapchat, or, I do stuff on LinkedIn, of course, and, Facebook because of my age. That's kind of my demographic. But I needed to go and find someone, right? So I just did not want to invest heaps and heaps of time in becoming the digital marketing expert. So it took me a while, but I did find someone who I really like working with, and who helps me kind of go along the way to do that. So, it's a bit like, I think that outsourcing is those elements are really important. So in terms of those three characters, some elements of those sorts of things, particularly if you are the dreamer, you may want to look at someone who's going to be a manager working for you, a realist, if you like, that can help you look at the practicalities, because otherwise you could just go and get lost amongst it all. And the other interesting thing is the expert role. And I think as I've got more into business, I've kind of left that expert role a little bit behind me, and because you can actually get a bunch of other people that are cleverer, smarter, and do it better than you in the delivery side of it, and that was a bit humbling for me, I should say. And I love the fact now that I don't necessarily, identify myself as being the expert in my business, but rather the leader of my business in terms of the teams that I have working with me and for me.
Yeah, and I think, from my limited experience in talking to entrepreneurs and on this podcast, namely, one thing that I believe is that if people have an idea, if you have an idea that you think it might work, you're a little bit scared to share that with someone. Like, you feel like you don't want to give a piece of your baby per se up. So I feel like initially someone might be a little bit, adverse to going and seeking help at the beginning. So I guess how does one manage fear in that way? If they're fearful of someone stealing their idea, so to speak, or how have you managed fear throughout your career in life?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to trusting the sorts of people that you would go to for advice and counsel. And they may not be your usual suspects. You may pick other people that are probably a little bit off center and would be willing to give you their perspectives. I think when you start off in business, you probably, if you have an idea, you want to go and test it to make sure, get a proof of concept. Is this going to go anyway? Is this going to work? So you're typically doing all three roles when you start off, right? You're doing everything. But as you get along that road and you realize, well, I actually need help, and that could be 3 months, 6 months, 3 years down the track, you know that if you don't expand and bring people into the business, you will decline and your business will die. It just is the life cycle. Let's assume you've got a product that's going really well, or a service or an offering that people are really interested about. As you get to a certain growth point, you're just going to plateau out and level out, and if it'll eventually come to an end, and that'll be it. So you come to a decision point, I think, along that journey. And as I said, it could be 3, 6, 12, 3 years, whatever it is, that you say, okay, I need to bring someone in. And who is that person? At that stage, you probably have a pretty good idea as to what that formula is for that kind of business. And that was a great bit of advice that was given to me when I first started off Forum India, my first business, 13 years ago. The boss, who was the president of this consulting company, said, Andre, don't make the business about you, because if you make the business about you, you become a prisoner to the business. So the first thing I did when I went to India with my family in 2008 was try to find someone who's going to run the business for me. And I was very fortunate that I did. And to this day, 13 years later, he is running my team in India for me, which, I provide advice and counsel. But, we went through 4 years of living there, rolling up our sleeves, doing everything together. So eventually that I could step back a little bit, because there's no way I could have sustained doing that for a long period of time. So yes, that's my bit of advice is, try and find, someone who's a kindred spirit, someone who's got, you can work with and you like working with, really important as well. And trust is, of course, fundamental in this. So, so in terms of the fear of people stealing my idea, I don't think I had that. I overcame it pretty quickly. You're always going to have someone trying to copy you. In the world we live in today, someone's ahead of you, someone's got a better idea, and it's going to go for it. So yeah, It's a trust issue, I think, Eric, more than anything else.
Sure. Yeah, and you found someone that you sought out to intentionally find a person that would be a good leader for your business.
Yeah.
What traits did you look at in that type of person? What makes a good leader in your opinion, Andre?
So it's interesting. It's all great in hindsight, isn't it? Because at the time it was like, who can I afford and who's going to work for me, really? But the thing I looked at was someone I could work with. So the biggest issue was likability for me, that I actually had to enjoy liking with them. When I was running the consulting company here in Australia before I went into business, I had a great team, super high-powered, bright, very capable people. But sometimes the egos got in the way and didn't make my job as a leader very enjoyable, because I didn't actually think about likability very much. And, working with people, I often thought about the idea of competence. And I think I shifted when I started up my own business. Likability became a lot more important. So yes, they had to have the basic skills, but likability at the personal level. The second thing I would say is they've got to be brilliant at business development. Right? The thing I would say to anyone going into business is selling and money are not dirty words. Selling and money are absolutely critical for your survival. So business development is the thing that keeps your business alive. Without anything coming in the front end, you got nothing. You got nothing. So think about how you go about engaging clients, getting clients to pay to engage you or your organization. So with Sumit, the guy who I hired, he was brilliant at the sales process and still is to this day. It's the kind of thing that drives him. And we had to then put around him the skills that I talked about. The realist, the person who looks after the detail side of it. So we built a team around Sumit and his ideas, because I would say he was definitely the expert. And together we do the dreaming part as well. But we did have to put in place the management side of it that probably isn't the stuff not that he's not good at, just doesn't like doing. So for me, business development was really critical, but likability at the personal level would be the two things I would look for going forward. And to extend on that, even the other business that I set up when I returned back to Australia, Ariel, which is the organization we do executive leadership presence with, I went into business with a person I used to work with previously on the same criteria, someone I really liked. So likability was very key, and he was very, very good at selling. The rest of the stuff we could figure out. So if you could do those two things, but if you don't have someone who can sell or wants to sell or is interested, it's a red flag for me.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Andre, do you think you can teach likability? Like, you can obviously learn the business acumen over time, or you can get an MBA, or you can train yourself in those ways, but do you think you could teach a person how to be more likable? Is that possible?
I think people can increase their likability a little bit, but not necessarily wholesale. It comes down to chemistry. So it's a chemistry between two human beings. We Eric, you, me, everyone we know, we're a cocktail of experiences and values and DNA and personality. But when you put two people together, it works, or sometimes it doesn't work. So unlikable people are liked by someone, right? It's just not liked by me. So I don't classify someone as unlikable to the world. There's just no chemistry that exists between the way they see the world and interpret the world and the way I do. So I tend to, avoid them. There are also what I call the psychic vampires, the people who just are so negative that they suck the energy out of me every time I see them. And I just try to avoid them. I did work with some of them, and I learned my lesson early in the piece, that I just didn't want to have those around me anymore. The psychic vampires, if you like. Yes.
Yeah. So at the core, it seems like you just want to find the right fit. So, and you can think back, and people listening, where do you look for the right fit in your life? Maybe you're searching for a college. You might hear someone say, you just want to go where it feels right. Mm-hmm. Did you, like, Andre, have you felt that in each of the business endeavors that you've gone through? Like, you've got your consulting, on the side, where you have executive coaching, you have the Ariel group, and Shenta Day that you just shared that just started. But I mean, how do you how do you figure out that chemistry? Is it just a feeling, or what advice do you have in that?
I wish I could put a formula to it. Then I could maybe sell it.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to just, intuition and that mix of chemistry of two people coming together with a similar and aligned on a particular purpose, who want to do similar things and who can work together to bring the best out of each other, right? They don't have to be best friends necessarily, but they have to be able to bring the best out of each other. And that's, sometimes when you're the leader, that's a little bit hard because people often are very respectful of you and kind of hold back. So I've tried very, very, very hard to make sure that those relationships I have are quite egalitarian at best. So, they can call me on my behavior, and we have a culture of candor with respect, right? So we respect each other and we can give each other feedback, but respectfully. But that's got to be part of the chemistry of how we work together. If you can't take feedback, then it becomes really, really difficult. So it is that gut feel, Eric. I wish I could actually have a formula. I don't.
Yeah, if we could bottle that up and put it in a package that you could sell, I think you'd probably make a lot of money doing that.
Yeah. Maybe that's your next PhD, mate.
Yeah, there you go. Just to give you a little background here, Andre. So the reason I created this podcast was honestly a little bit selfishly at first. I wanted to figure out what made a successful person and what keeps someone driven so that I could use that for myself to advance. But also, in the greater mission of the podcast, I want to share that knowledge with other people. And, possibly I envision it someday, maybe I'll be able to write a small book that has bits and pieces from each person showing how they were able to remain successful, granted that they were from different backgrounds. So I want to ask you, what is the one single driving force that keeps your inner clock ticking towards the success that you have?
Wow. Yeah. Can I try and answer that in a couple of ways, Eric? Because coming up with one is challenging, and maybe I'm not doing it a service, but there's a couple of things I would say, and some things I've learned probably in the last 10 years more than anything else is so the first part is how I live my life, and the second part is what drives me. So the thing that drives me, I'll answer first, which is, I want to make a tangible contribution for those people who come in contact with me. I know that sounds really lofty, but it's this whole issue of what ignited me when I was, decided to move out to myself. I actually want to make a difference in the world, not just show up, not just fade and rust away, in a retired life somewhere. That kind of didn't define me as a person. So the thing that pushed me was to make a difference. And the vehicle that I used to do that was my expertise, if you like, at that stage, which was around the development of people. And I love being able to work with people to make them better. So I do that through, the training courses that I've run, over the years. Through the coaching that I do, and all of the businesses that I run is all about developing people. I mean, that's the singular, the golden thread that weaves its way through everything. So when I wake up in the morning, and even whether it's friends who I'm having lunch with today, I always feel that at the end of that conversation, I want to leave them with something which has touched them, made something significant. So that's kind of like my inner clock that drives me, if you like. When I jump out of bed, I do think about that a lot. So yeah, that's probably it. I'll stop there because I'm just going to go on otherwise.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, I think I've tried to think, what is my answer to some of these questions that I've asked people? And it's honestly, my answer sometimes changes from day to day or week to week. So I think that, it's probably if you're listening to this and you think, I don't know exactly what my one single driving force is, I think that's completely fine, because if I was to say what mine is right now, it might change in a couple days even. So yeah, Andre, thank you so much for sharing that single driving force that keeps you driven towards success. Now I want to ask you, what is success? How do you define that term? I've heard a few people answer it. Most of them have answered it different than one another, but I'm curious, what is your definition of that word?
That is a great question, Eric. And I think, you could probably write your book on just the answers you get from this. For me, it comes down to this. when I was in my 20s, I did an exercise on values clarification, probably in my late 20s, about the same age as you, Eric. And I remember it had a profound effect on me because I was never really able to articulate what were the things that were most important to me. And, over the years, I've come back to, what are the things that are most important to me? And they've remained reasonably constant. There's a few changes over time. And I think in the last 10, 12 years, it's become paramount to me that I live my life in concert with my values. And that means being able to articulate where they are and also prioritize them from 1 to 5, right? And it sounds a little bit obsessive and compulsive, but I kind of do that. So success for me is living those top 5 values, if you like. So I go through a process, and I still do with teams and clients and people. In fact, I did one just a couple of months ago, and it was highly impactful of getting people in a room, getting them through a process of identifying what are their top 5 values, and then taking them through a process of what is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And the reason we do 2, 3, 4, and 5 is people often say, yeah, I know what my values are, my family. Yeah, it's really important to me. Or, and they stick with 1. Well, as human beings, we're defined by so much more. So actually understanding what 2, 3, 4, and 5 is critical. So for me, I kind of look at those 5 things as my definition of success. Happy to share this with you if you like. Of course, family is up there in terms of one of them. But for me, family is being super connected. It's because my kids have grown up and they're spread across Australia, and I've got grandkids, so I have to work really hard to be really connected with them. The second one is adventures. I often look at everything I do as an adventure, and Kathy, my wife, laughs because she said, "What are we going to do today?" I said, "We're going to go for an adventure. We're going to do something we've never done before," and we have a laugh. So adventures doesn't have to be about walking across the Himalayas, which I've done, by the way. It's also the little things that might happen on a day-to-day basis. So this whole issue of adventuring together, and I would say all of my businesses that I go on, including Shanti Day, is an adventure. Kathy and myself talk about Shanti Day as an adventure. We don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail. We hope it's going to succeed, but it's kind of an adventure. The third one is learning and sharing, which is, I'm an avid learner. I want to learn, but I also want to share. It's not just about coming in, it's also about going out. And that's kind of taken, a center position most of my life, really. And to this day, I think about what is it that I've done, in the last 24 hours that I've learned and contributed back to other people. The fourth one, and, this is possibly the most important one at this stage of my life, is just feeling good in my own skin. And feeling good in my own skin is about, my health. So I again, this is my obsessive compulsive coming out over here. There's 5 things that kind of I focus on every day. So I'm a plant-based food eater, if you like. So my diet's really important. I reduce stress in my life through mindfulness, and that's when I started this new business that we have over here. I want to move flexibly, so yoga is a big part of it. As I get older, I realize that my range of movement is less, so yoga helps me kind of do that. I pause every day, so the pause is in fact the mindfulness stuff that I was talking about. And the last one is be playful. So I look at those things because if I do those 5 things, I feel really, really good in terms of my own skin. And my last value is around independence, autonomy, and hence my businesses. So, as soon as I find that I'm losing freedom, it really crushes me. So the way I kind of wrap those 5 values is, I think about that when I do my again, this is going to sound a little bit obsessive compulsive again. So when I do my morning walks, so the other thing is exercise. When I do my morning walks, I sit down and do my 5 minutes of my gratitude journal in my head, and my gratitude journal is just replaying the last 24 hours and across those 5 values. And I find that just inspires me so much. So I feel really successful when I'm in concert with those, and I feel like I'm just not living my life when those are not being met. So it's a very long answer to your question, mate, but that's kind of where it's at for me.
Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, it really makes me think. You got me thinking, what are my 5 values if I had to list them out? And I think I'd have to take a little time to really lock that in. I mean, obviously I have family and, I have my fiance be high on that list. But honestly, I think it gives the audience something to think about. If you don't know what those 5 values are, you really should think diligently about writing some of those down and thinking, from a mindfulness standpoint, Andre, I think you brought up a really good point of reflecting and being grateful for what you have right now. Because I know I get caught up in this mindset of, that visionary mindset, that dreamer mindset you talked about earlier. I'm thinking about what's next or what could be. And I don't want to lose sight of what is right now. And so being present, being mindful, that's something I'm still practicing that. It's tough.
And that's what you do. It's called a practice. It's called a mindfulness practice because that's what you do. You never become an expert at it. You just practice it. It's just practice, right? And that's the word mindfulness practice is picked very deliberately because, people who've been doing it for 30 years are still practicing.
Yeah, just like practice of medicine, practice of pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
I've practiced mindfulness a little bit throughout my life, but yeah, it's tough, and I'm guessing you just get better with it over time. Definitely would love to, share the website with the audience here. If you look down in the show notes, everybody, I'm going to include all the businesses that Andre is a part of. I think he's been a phenomenal guest talking about the success he's had, giving advice as going through not a midlife crisis, but a midlife entrepreneurship type experience. So appreciate you sharing all the stories, Andre, and really, really appreciate you taking the time here. I know you're on the Australia time zone and near Sydney. So it's getting to be about 11:30 a.m. for you.
Yes, it is. It is. Hey, I found this really enjoyable, Eric. I really enjoyed the conversation. Loved your questions, by the way. And I just want to wish you so much success with this. And, I'm kind of now emotionally invested in you, mate. So I'm going to be tracking you and seeing how you go with all of this. So good luck in your journey.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
And if I can be of any help to you, let me know.
Absolutely. Well, if you ever have any ideas on how I can, better connect with an audience with a podcast like this, I'm all ears.
Absolutely. I will keep that in mind.
Perfect, Andre. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the Eric Mueller Show. You have yourself a great day, sir.
You too, Eric. All the best.
Thank you.